I want to welcome everybody to the Resident and Family Support Council. This is our group that has been meeting every other week, and we have a variety of different topics that we have been talking about. This week, we're going to be talking about electronic monitoring and understanding your rights. And we have two people that are going to be talking about this. That's Lawrence Wagner and Julie Lewis. Lawrence is actually the regional ombudsman for the suburban Cook County area. And Julie is a family member who has undertaken this she has a camera in her loved one's room, and she's going to share with us all about why she did it and how she did it, so that we can have a deeper understanding, so that this is an option that somebody else may want to use in order to be able to stay connected to their loved one. Just a couple of things that I want to remind everybody of, in case this is one of your first times calling in. We will be answering questions in the chat box and putting links in there that any of the presenters talk about. Those will go into the chat box, so please look at the chat box periodically. And you can also save the chat box at the end of the call just by clicking on the little dots over to the side when you click on the chat box icon. And then also we'll be emailing out any links that are shared to everyone who's attended today's meeting. A couple of other things just to remind everybody, we just want to make sure that we're not using any facility names nor family members' names in the chat box to avoid any confidentiality issues. And we just want to make sure that we're all being respectful towards each other, which this has been a great group, and we really look forward to having today's conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass the ball over to Lawrence, who can start off our conversation. Lawrence, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thanks, Lee. My name is Lawrence Wagner. For those of you who don't know me, I am the regional ombudsman for suburban Cook, except Evanston. Evanston has its own program, so we don't cover them. So generally, that's my role. So I was asked to talk about electronic monitoring in long-term care facilities. So I have a brief PowerPoint presentation. And if I can figure this out, I will share my screen.
Lawrence, you should be able to see it at the bottom of the top. You got it? Great.
I don't know. You tell me, do I have it?
Yep, it's up. You got it.
Okay, great. So we're talking about electronic monitoring in long-term care facilities. This is authorized by state law 210 ILCS 32/1 for the legal minds in Public Act 99-430. And what it does is this act basically allows residents of long-term care facilities to have electronic monitoring devices in their rooms. Obviously, there are certain rules about it. It's not just a carte blanche blanket rule. It lays out certain responsibilities for the residents as well as for the facilities, and it tells what kind of monitoring can be done. In this case, it can be video monitoring, or it can be audio monitoring, and it could also be recorded. The one weird exception that I find is that the device is not allowed, should not be able to take still photographs, or at least you should not take still photographs with it. I'm not sure what the reasoning is behind that carve out, but you're not allowed to take still photographs with whatever device is installed. Most of the facilities we deal with are included in the law, the ID/DD Community Care Act. For facilities, those types of facilities that have 30 or more beds, facilities licensed under the MC/DD Act, and long-term care facilities licensed under the Nursing Home Care Act. Facilities that provide housing to individuals with dementia are also included in this act, or are allowed to have electronic monitoring devices. Other facilities that are included in this act, or that are allowed to do electronic monitoring, are those that are licensed under 2010 ILCS 165. Sorry, I'm a lawyer, and I have a habit of spouting the law, and I don't mean to bore you guys with that. But those facilities include facilities that are community integrated living arrangements and the Developmental Disabled Facilities Act. We can also do electronic monitoring in CILAs and in facilities for the developmental disabled. And we have a description there of developmentally disabled facility, which means a facility or a section of a facility that is licensed by operated by or is under contract with the state, sorry, my phone is ringing, or a political subdivision of the state, and that admits persons with developmental disabilities for residential services. So a pretty large swath of the facilities that we cover. Facilities that are not covered by the Act are supported living facilities, assisted living facilities, and specialized mental health rehabilitation facilities. Now, this doesn't mean you cannot have electronic monitoring in these facilities. It just means that the law doesn't specifically allow for it. But if you have a loved one in one of these facilities and you're interested in having electronic monitoring in those facilities, it doesn't hurt to ask. Just be aware that if you do ask, those facilities do not have to allow it because the law doesn't require them to allow it. Under the law, the resident has the right to purchase an electronic monitoring device that can record audio and video. And we have to keep in mind that whenever a resident wants to do this, they have to keep in mind that this is done at their own expense. The facility does not have to pay for the device. It doesn't have to pay for monitoring. It doesn't have to pay for maintenance. It doesn't have to pay for anything. Anything related to that device, the resident themselves have to pay for. The only thing the facility has to do is make available to the resident, basic infrastructure that they will need to connect the device. The other thing too, one of the big items here is consent. So there are times when if the resident is the one who wants the device, then certainly the resident is giving consent. A lot of times a family member who's trying to get the device in a room, and if it's a family member or a guardian or someone else trying to get the device in the room, they need to make sure they have the resident's consent. There, of course, as we all know from our experiences, there will be times where the resident cannot give consent for whatever reason. If a physician determines that the resident cannot give consent, then the individual who wants to have the device in the room has to go through certain steps to make sure that the resident understands what the device is, what the device does, and that they don't object to it as much as we can determine that they're able to object. Consent also has to come from a roommate. If the individual has a roommate, the roommate has to give written consent. At any time, the roommate can withdraw that consent, or there are times when roommates are moved. If a roommate who previously gave consent has moved to a different room and the person gets a new roommate, that new roommate also have to give consent. If that new roommate does not give consent, then the camera has to be, I don't want to say removed, but it has to be taken offline, if you will, and can no longer be operational. And then there's a form, I think we get to a link to the form at the end of this presentation. There's an IDPH form that has to be completed that records all of the consents and all of the conditions under which the device will be operated in that room. It's an 8-page form, so they're asking for a lot of information, but it's important that form is completed. And if the facility is doing things right, that form will have to be completed in its entirety before the facility will give allowance for the device to be installed.
Lawrence, if I could just excuse you for 1 second, I went ahead and I put the link for that form is in the box right now, so everybody can have access to that.
Okay, that's great.
Everyone can know that.
Okay, so the link is there. In a situation where a roommate does not give consent, the facility has to accommodate the request for the electronic monitoring. So the facility can either move the resident who wants, it can move either resident. But as an advocate for residents, I'm kind of leery about that because in my role as an ombudsman, we can't advocate for one resident against another. So, if someone comes to us with that situation, then it'll create kind of a dicey situation for our role as an ombudsman. However, the facility, if they can work it out, then they can move one or the other resident out of that room, and they can bring in another resident who doesn't mind having electronic monitoring, or they can move the requesting resident to a private room. But the parenthetical there is that obviously the requesting resident who moves to a private room will then have to pay a private room rate. And if they're not able to do that, if they're on Medicaid or otherwise, then clearly that's not going to be an option. One thing that the law does provide for, though, I think is a good thing here for the resident who wants monitoring is that the facility has to reevaluate the request every 2 weeks until they can comply with it. So this isn't a one-time deal where the facility can say, hey, oh, we tried, but we couldn't find you a roommate who would allow monitoring, or we couldn't find you a different room, and then just leave it at that. They're required under the law to revisit the issue every 2 weeks until they can resolve it in the favor of the resident who wants electronic monitoring in the room. Again, we talked about these types of monitoring devices, ones that they can stream, or they can record video or audio. One of the things that to keep in mind is some of the infrastructure requirements that the facility has, that would make sure that it can accommodate the requirements of the device. My area, suburban Coke, we don't really have that problem much, but I know a lot of my colleagues who serve downstate regions, a lot of facilities down there don't have internet. If the device you want to use will require access to the internet and they don't have internet, then clearly you won't be able to use that device. So it will be important to understand what technological support the device will need and what technological support the facility will be able to provide to make sure the two are compatible, that you can use the device successfully. And you don't just bang a device that will just sit there and not function. Other things you need to know, the device must be out in the open and in a fixed position. So, you can't be some cloak and tiger thing where you're trying to play gotcha. Everyone, which kind of ties into the next point, where everyone needs to be aware that there's monitoring going on in that room. The facility, under the Act, the facility is required to post a sign outside of the room, alerting anyone who goes in that there's electronic monitoring going on. They also, and this didn't make it to the slide, but the facility is also required to put a notice at the front door to alert everyone coming into the facility that there's electronic monitoring going on in the building itself. So, this a big deal here is notice. You need to be aware that they're being monitored. And that kind of ties into, different laws in the state where you can't record someone without their consent under most circumstances. So facilities have a role to play as well. They need to, as I said before, they need to make necessary accommodations. They need to make facilities available for this to happen. What they cannot do is they cannot interfere with the monitoring. Once it's in place, it's in place. And I know that there are some facilities in our region that have their own electronic monitoring guidelines that they operate under within their facilities and their sister facilities. Not all facilities do that, but the ones that do, great, because at least they're aware of the fact that this law is out there, and they're aware of what their roles and responsibilities are under it. And the one, I've only seen one, and the one that I've seen, they clearly make a point that they're not allowed to interfere with monitoring without resident consent. It's also illegal for them to intercept the recording and destroy it. You can imagine a situation where they might want to do that when the recording may have captured one of their staff members doing something they should not be doing, or in the opposite, not doing something they should be doing, which, is something that these recordings can be used for. They actually can be used at administrative hearings to support or not support a position that the facility is taking, or a position that a resident is taking, either with a care issue or a discharge issue. The facility can't access the recording without resident consent. If there is a recording, you don't have to record, but if there is a recording, the facility cannot access it without a resident consent. And the facility, and this is a big one, this is one that I think a lot of people are concerned about, the facility cannot retaliate or discriminate against any resident who wants to use electronic monitoring in their rooms. And one of the most common ways that we see this is that they claim that their staff don't want to go into that room and provide care because there's electronic monitoring going on. They can't do that. They shouldn't allow to exempt resident staff from providing care just because there's electronic monitoring going on. A couple of times that's come up in one of my facilities. I always respond, well, what is your staff concerned about? If they're providing appropriate care within the confines of their jobs, then they shouldn't have anything to worry about with electronic monitoring. But that argument rarely goes over well with facilities, but I think it's a valid one. If you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't be concerned about electronic monitoring. And That's my slide to remind me about the brochure link. So there's Lee put the brochure link in place for anyone who wants to see. I'm sorry, did you do that, Lee, or am I making this up? The state has
getting it actually. I didn't get that put any place into a cloud anywhere, so it will be connected to the website, onto the Ombudsman page website. So I'll make sure I send that out to the whole group. But if you go to the Illinois Department on Aging and then you click on the Ombudsman program, the link will be placed there. That helps answer a lot of these questions.
Right, and basically, if I wasn't clear, it's a link to a brochure that describes the electronic monitoring program. As Lee said, it will answer some of these questions, and it will lay out some of the rights and responsibilities, so you can have a quick and handy little cheat sheet, if you will, about the program if you decide you want to advocate for this for your loved ones who are in the facility, or for any residents who are currently on, if they want to advocate for it for themselves. You can have this handy little brochure there to help guide that conversation. And if no one has any questions for me at this point, I will turn it over to Julie, who does have an electronic monitoring device in her dad's room in a facility, and she will talk about her experiences with that.
Veronica on the phone.
Yes, Veronica.
Yes, Lawrence, I just wanted to ask a question, if you can touch on the still photos when you visit your loved ones. I know you said that we cannot take still photos if it's installed, but photos that are taken on your camera phones, for instance, can you touch on that for me?
Sure. I think if you visit your loved one, you are free to take pictures with your loved one on your cell phone or even a personal camera if you have one. I think that's a different issue from and that's why I said I'm not sure what the Electronic Monitoring Act was trying to address when it said you can't take still photos. I'm guessing they're saying you can't take still photos while maybe care is being provided. I don't know. It's not clear from the act, and I couldn't find any resource that clarified for me why that exception exists in the law. But you are certainly free to take pictures of yourself and or your loved one when you go visit. Because that's just a basic right that we all have as human beings.
And I think it's important to notice, Veronica, that you cannot make sure you just don't get any other residents in the background, any other people who live there, because that could be a violation then of their right.
So while you're on that about still photos, I have a question. One of the things a lot of family members told me during the pandemic, especially when they were doing window visits and different things, that the facilities kept telling them, no, you're not allowed to take a picture of your loved one. What do they do then? Because I heard that a lot, especially early on.
Well, as an ombudsman, my knee-jerk reaction to say, call the ombudsman office. And we'll advocate on your behalf with the facility. Because the facility, they have no legal right to prevent you from taking a picture of your loved one.
Gary, this is Jessica at Belsley, and my question would be to ask them, can you show me what regulation or what law says that we're not allowed to do that? I would put it back on them to explain.
That's usually what I was advising families, but sometimes it helps when they hear it from you guys too.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with that, and that's not, I'm not trying to downplay Jessica's suggestion at all. It's a great one, but oftentimes when we ask facilities for, rules or regulations that informs their decision, they don't have one, and often the comeback is, well, that's just our policy. And of course, then we still throw the question back at them, well, do you have that policy in writing so that we can see it? And of course, the answer is generally, no, we don't have it in writing. That just came to us from corporate. So that, this whole nebulous corporate, we get that response out. So I mean, I think Jessica's suggestion is a great one. I think it should, residents should do that, but I'm also not hopeful that they'll get a meaningful answer when they do it.
Yeah, I guess I was going from the standpoint of, if they say you're not allowed to do that, it's violating a right. It's like, well, what is it? What are we breaking? Because it's not. So that's where I was thinking. But
I agree with you. I agree with you, because it's always good to get them to explain, if they can, the basis for their whatever their policy is. And it's helpful to us from an advocate standpoint to know that they can't give us that, because then we know they don't, it helps us, it helps inform our advocacy when we know they can't point to a specific regulation or a specific rule or even a policy that they might have in-house.
And I think in that same part of that conversation is it was typed in the chat. What do we do if a facility flat out refuses to allow the camera in the room? And again, Lawrence, do you want to speak to that?
Well, if I can mimic Jessica, we asked them, well, why not? What's your basis? What's your regulation? What's your rule? What's your policy? And chances are they will not have one, because the law clearly allows it. So then at that point, it goes back to my original response: call your ombudsman, and we will advocate for you on that issue.
And sometimes to have the law in front of you, even when you do this, and that link is also provided. The Authorized Electronic Monitoring Long-Term Care Facilities Act is also in the chat box. So if you click on that, then you can print a copy of it and even bring it in and say, I can do this. So please allow me to do it. It's my right. It's my loved one's right. Without further ado, Julie, do you want to share with us how you're doing all of this?
Thanks, guys, for having me. I really feel like this is a very important topic, and I think it's one that I don't believe people really know that they can, have these devices in the rooms. And it actually became law. I don't know if you said this, Lawrence, but I believe it was January 1st of 2016.
I did not say that. No.
What's that? You didn't say it. Anyway, so since 2016, but it still seems that a lot of people are in the dark about it. So, and I did, do some research before I did do this camera thing. And I think covered all of my bases. I did not realize that it's not, the act does not include supportive living, which is where my dad is a supportive living. But they actually were very, receptive and were okay with, me having this camera. And at first they did not have me fill out a form, but then I think later on, the director or the executive director was fairly kind of new at the job. And I think she realized she needed, and so anyway, I ended up filling out that 8-page form. So anyway, I try to cross my T's, dot my I's, and, be on the right side of the law with everything. My dad does have dementia, and I moved him into a memory care facility, in July. So it was in the midst of the, pandemic. I just could not imagine. I knew I was going to be separated from him, and I could not imagine not knowing what was happening or going on with him. Because he's really not able to use a cell phone or even a landline at this point. So I use my camera as an advocacy tool. I don't look at it as voyeurism or I'm trying to be a policeman and try to catch bad people. I very much appreciate the staff that take care of my dad. They know, that I have the camera in their room, and I let them know, hey, you guys, I am not on this camera 24/7. My main thing is it just gives me peace of mind to know that, my dad's doing okay. After I first moved him in July, I was very glad that I had the camera, because what I was seeing was a lack of the ADLs. He doesn't know that he needs to brush his teeth. He doesn't know that he needs to, shower or change his clothes or anything like that. So there was very much a lack of that happening. And I believe there was one day where I think he was in the same clothes for 6 days. I really hadn't been paying that close of attention because I was helping my daughter move at the time. And so then I kind of went back through the camera and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's in that same clothes. So I brought that to their attention. Things got a little bit better. But there were several instances where, I was a voice for my dad. There was a time when he did have a CNA that I just don't think, I don't know. I just don't think she really liked her job, honestly. She was very demeaning, derogatory towards my dad. She had helped him get back to his room when he was wandering out one evening. And he had pajamas on, but I guess she thought he had clothes on. And she was saying, you need to get back in your, we need to get back in bed. You need to let's get your clothes off. We don't sleep in clothes. And then my dad was, kind of got upset. He's like, it's none of your business what I sleep in. And then she said, well, you need to lay down. And he said, you need to leave. And she said, well, not till you take your shoes and socks off. I mean, it was just like she was treating him like he was a toddler. I'm being very kind in how I am relaying this. I actually showed that video to Stephen, one of your colleagues. So he got in on a little bit of that as well. And I did bring that up to the executive director's attention as well. And I think what they were planning to do was to do some training with this person. And I do think that sometimes when the girls or when the CNAs see themselves, in a situation, I know how we all are, in our heads, we're thinking we're doing one thing, but then it comes across as another. So I think it's really helpful that some of these negative things can turn around and become positive when the executive director or the ombudsman can share with that person and say, hey, here's what this looked like. Let's look at this together, kind of thing, and use it as a training tool. And so I think that's been, kind of a, helpful thing as well.
Julie, tell them about the night you couldn't find your dad.
That's what I was getting ready to tell, Carrie. So the one evening, I checked the camera about 8:00 and just the live camera feed, and I didn't see my dad in his room. And I thought, well, that's really odd. Usually at that time of night, he's always in bed asleep. So I looked back because it's a motion detected. And so I could see when he last, when it was last detected. And I saw him go into his restroom, and that was like around 6:00. So he had been MIA for, 2 hours. And so I called the facility and asked them, I said, hey, I think I have reason to believe that my dad might be in his restroom and he's been in there for a while. Can someone please go check on him? And so sure enough, they went, and he was in his restroom and he was laying on the floor. I don't know what the deal was. He didn't hurt himself, I'm so grateful for that. But, who knows, that time of night, he may have laid there another, couple of hours before they would come in and check on him. So I was very glad that I had the camera in that instance as well. And then there's just like day-to-day things. Like even today, I got on there about noon and saw that they came in to get him for lunch. And so he got out of his recliner, and between the recliner and the door, he makes a little turn and goes to his bed and lays down. So he didn't make it out to lunch. And so I looked, and this is like 15 minutes after the fact. And so I ended up calling again, or I actually got on, I have an Echo device as well, which is, it has a video screen and you can do video calls. And so I use that actually simultaneously with the camera. So I ended up getting on my Echo, and he was laying in his bed, and I was like, Dad, you're missing lunch, get up. And he just laid there and didn't, respond. So I ended up calling and saying, hey, I know you guys are having lunch, and, Dad started to go out to lunch, but I think he sidetracked and then he just laid down. So they got him up to go out for lunch. So just things like that. Trying to think. So yeah. And so during the pandemic, it was just so sad seeing him in his room by himself, because there were several outbreaks. So he was isolated. He was like a caged animal. It was from him going from his recliner to the bathroom to his bed. I noticed that he was sleeping in bed a lot more. He was starting to become more agitated. So that escalated, and I was told that he did hit someone and a staff member. So anyway, I ended up contacting his physician, and we got some antidepressant kind of stuff going on for him, and it's helped tremendously. And at that point too, I was able to request compassionate care. And had I not had the camera to see what was taking place, I don't know that I would have, gotten the compassionate care visits. Also with Carrie's help, I wouldn't have been able to do it without the help of the group that I'm involved with, Caregivers for Compromise. It's been a lifesaver. Trying to think what other notes I have here. On the Echo device, I have a little note on the bottom that says, it says Echo, call Julie. And so I've told the CNAs or the direct care staff, call me, if you ever need me for anything, just call me on that. And so there have been times where, Dad was kind of like resistant to, take a shower, or, I'm like, you guys can throw me under the bus. Just tell them that it's, Julie needs you to take a shower. So, so they'll call me sometimes on that. And I'm like, hey, Dad, they're just trying to help you. I know you think you've had your shower, but you haven't. And so then they're able to get him in the shower. So it's actually been I think very helpful for overall. I'm glad that I have it. I know I wanted to say a couple I can't think of what else I was going to say.
Julie, while you're thinking about that, I'm loving this use of the Echo device.
Yeah.
So is your father able to use it with the dementia that he has? Is he saying,
no,
call Julie? I'm curious.
No, he's not. He's not able to. No. But I tell you what, the Echo has a nice feature on it. And so he has to do absolutely nothing. What I can do is just tell it to drop in on him. And then it gives a fuzzy picture for about, 10 or 15 seconds. And it has a tone or an audible tone that they can hear. And then that lets them know, oh, hey, I'm getting ready to be, dropped in on, and she'll be able to see me. He doesn't even comprehend that. But I'm able to just drop in and then say, hey, did you see the Cardinals are on tonight? Let's get the TV on for you, that kind of thing. So, but I really feel like I just wish more people knew about, the law that they are allowed to have these in the facilities, and that it's just such a good advocacy tool. I don't think it's a negative thing. I look at it as a positive. My dad does not realize what is taking place. He has, he can't speak for himself. I am his voice. And there's numerous times where I've had to speak up for him. So I can't say enough about it. The one that I purchased was very inexpensive. I think it was like $35 from Amazon, and then I pay for a cloud service. It's like $7.99 a month. It's worth every penny. So anyway, with that, I guess I'll wrap up what I was talking about. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
There actually was a question in the chat box about elaborating on what equipment you're using. Would you be able to type into the chat box the name of do you know the name of it or no?
Actually, I think, yeah.
I just posted a link to it on Amazon in the chat box.
Great. Oh, great. Thank you.
And there are several, you don't have to get the exact same one as me, but there are several, hundreds, thousands of these little devices out on the market. So, and you can spend anywhere from, $30 all the way up to hundreds of dollars on these things. So wide range. The one I have, I really like because it's motion detected. I can go back throughout the day and look to see, did they get him ready in the morning? Did he go to lunch? Did they get him ready for bed? Those are my big things. I want to know that he's getting dressed in the morning. I want to know that he's getting ready for bed. He's incontinent. Are they changing him? That kind of thing. So it's been very, very helpful.
Well, it seems like somebody with dementia that can be very helpful. Does your dad communicate back with you when you're talking through the Alexa device? Does he answer?
Yes, most of the time, I will check to see, and then again, I use the camera to see if he's in his room for one, and then I can say, oh, if he has the TV on loud, forget it. I'm not going to, be able to talk with him at this point. So, but yes, no, he will be able to. I think he's sometimes like, what are you doing in that little box kind of thing. But yes, he's able to, answer questions when I call on the device.
I think that's another really wonderful hint for that. And I would think, Lawrence, using the Echo device, that would also qualify for the electronic monitoring device. So we should go through the same procedures. Would that be your opinion?
Let me jump in on that, because I don't think so. Because like Lynn has cameras on his phone and his computer. Now, granted, I don't dial in, but he dials out all the time to me and other family members, and nobody in our facility has ever questioned that at all.
It's kind of a gray area. My father-in-law is also in a skilled nursing facility. And after my husband saw what, the advantages that I was having, communicating with my father, we decided to get his dad one as well. And so his facility did say, hang on, wait a minute, we need to check this out. And then they ended up having him sign a form, because it has the drop-in feature on it. So, then you can, see and listen what's happening. So it's kind of like a security camera in a sense, in that manner. But that, I know it's just kind of a gray area.
Yeah, I think the Echo device is more akin to FaceTime.
Yes.
Right.
So we're dealing with we're not even dealing with the act as far as that goes. And I don't think, they can, by they, I mean, the facility can make a reasonable argument that you can't have FaceTime. You can't FaceTime with your loved one, especially in this environment, which is kind of a big go-to when we weren't able to visit facilities. So it's different because there's not monitoring going on. It's just basically a phone call, just happen to involve video. So,
I
don't think they can prohibit that.
Yeah,
especially with the bill that just passed.
But to speak to what Julie just did speak to is that drop-in feature, which would be a little different than, and you don't press a button to answer it, it automatically brings you into their room. So that just is the place that just.
I'll share an instance. When that happened. My brother actually dropped in on my dad just a couple weeks ago, maybe it was. And there was a direct care staff in the room. I think she was in my dad's closet getting something, and she said she was the one that told me the story, and I had seen it on the camera. So then she was telling me about it. She was, I had no idea. And she said, I just hear this person behind me, and I'm like, where did they come from? And so then she realized what it was, and she laughed about it. So, but that was kind of comical.
And I think it's also useful the way you shared how if your father doesn't want to take a bath or a shower, how it makes it helpful for staff to be able to connect with you easily, and then for your dad to be able to see you as well as hear you. It's not just the phone connection.
Right.
That can make
very helpful.
Yeah. Make him maybe feel a little bit safer, because many times when people have dementia and they don't want to do those things, there's some fear that lies underneath that. You're a stranger. I don't know who you are. You're telling me you're going to take me to the shower. This makes me scared or nervous. And now to hear my daughter's voice can be soothing and calm.
Right.
And see her face.
Right.
Right. And it's certainly part of the argument that we use to convince facilities to not resist. I mean, they have to allow it, right? But it's part of the argument we use to show them how this can be a useful tool, for them as well. And a lot of times, when residents have quote unquote behaviors, if a family member can have quick access to them and talk to them, it can diffuse a lot of those situations as well.
There is a question in the box that says, is electronic monitoring used in many facilities? Can anybody speak to that? Lawrence, do you see it a lot as a regional ombudsman?
I don't see it a lot, unfortunately. I don't. That's a short answer to the question.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think it's due to people just they don't realize they don't know. They're just
you know, like Julie said, they just didn't know and just didn't ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, so that's something to make sure that all of us on this call, that we do make sure that we bring that forward to other family members, because it seems like, Julie, this has really helped provide you some comfort during the pandemic.
Very, very, very much so. Very much a peace of mind, knowing that I can get on there and check out what's happening. And again, I reiterate that I'm his voice, because he doesn't know.
Mm-hmm. And that can be very, very helpful. And I'm sorry if you spoke to this earlier. Did you start this before the pandemic, or was it initiated during the pandemic?
I moved him into his facility during the pandemic. So yes, I started it right then. Yes.
Okay. So there is another question in the chat box that says, if two people share a common space, a private living space, but they have their own private living space, can the residents put in their private space if the roommate objects to the common space? So it seems to me there's two rooms and then a common living room together. So it's like a shared common room with two bedrooms. And so if the roommate says, no, I don't want it, can the person still put it in their bedroom, in their own personal bedroom?
I would think yes. As long as the monitoring isn't violating the other person's privacy and it's only capturing the one resident's space, I would say yes. But again, it's not something that's specifically addressed in the law, but just going by the actual text of the law and the spirit of the law, I would say that is a safe that they can put one in the private space that only that resident accesses.
There was a question in there, and I'm not sure, Carrie, if you wanted to elaborate on it, the first question, or was that question answered?
No, I don't remember, but I've been putting questions in that people have asked me that I knew probably wouldn't get here today. And the common space was one of them.
When referring to the resident about the whole process, that also.
Oh yeah, just making sure that, the families understand, especially if you're guardian, the facility has to treat you as the resident when it comes to these decisions. Because you also have the facilities that say, well, they can't speak for themselves. We're not, it says the resident has to. No, if you're their guardian, usually if you're their POA, just like anything else you would sign for on their behalf, you also would have the right to authorize this. Because that's one of the things I think that's intimidating people, is that the facilities are making this difficult.
Right.
We heard a lot of it during the pandemic.
The fact of the matter is the act specifically addresses that even in a situation where the resident, him or herself, cannot consent, the act specifically allows for either a guardian or a POA or even a family member, a sibling, to consent on the resident's behalf. So again, if the facility is putting up that kind of resistance, it's simply just because they don't want the monitoring. It's not because they're looking out for the residents' interests or the residents' rights.
If a building has Wi-Fi, do they have to let you use it? Or
that's the only way that the device that I have, that's the only way it will work. But they have a couple of different Wi-Fi, connections. And so I use the resident Wi-Fi rather than their, primary Wi-Fi. Or I suppose you could set up your own, that's going to get it probably a little bit more pricey, but I assume that you could probably have a company or somebody come in and set a Wi-Fi up for you.
It does say in the law, and I can quote this, it says, if a resident chooses to install an electronic monitoring device that uses internet technology for visual or audio monitoring, that resident is responsible for contracting with an internet service provider. So the facility does not have to allow you to use their internet. There are some buildings whose internet has slowed down tremendously during this pandemic because you've got a lot of people that are on electronic devices. So they, it might be an iPad or laptop or something. So it does say that the facility does not have to permit you to use their internet service. So that could be a barrier.
Yeah, I'm fortunate that that's okay with the facility that I'm in. They're cool with that. So, but I can see what you're saying. Yeah, so that might be a barrier, or make it a little more difficult for some.
But if that is a barrier that anybody runs up against, they do have little, like Verizon, I know, sells a little, like I think they call it MiFi or MiFi, MiFi. And it's a little round device that actually has internet in that device. So you have your own username and your own password. So it's not like you got to have somebody come out to wire a device into your loved one's room. It could be a little portable device that you could get. Now that does usually come with a monthly service fee, I believe. So that would be another thing to look into if you get denied that. But do know that potentially could be a barrier.
But certainly talk to the facility first, because as Julie indicated, most, at least in this part of the world, facilities will have a guest Wi-Fi. They have the main Wi-Fi that they use for their business, which is a secure network, and then they'll have a more of an open network that anyone can use. And that's oftentimes when I go to a facility and I need the internet, that's the one they give me, and I can get on it and do some things. I just don't do things that necessarily require security, but they may very well make that accessible to residents as well.
There's another question that's in the chat box. It says, the law does not apply to assisted living, correct? It is up to assisted living then to say yes or no?
Correct.
Yes.
So just because it applies to assisted living doesn't mean that it doesn't apply, doesn't mean you can't ask. You could always ask. You can always ask.
But if the assisted living has memory care, it does apply, correct?
Because of the dementia unit provision.
Yes.
Right, but it would apply to that unit. They won't apply to the entire facility.
Okay, but it would in the dementia unit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it never hurts to ask, honestly.
It doesn't. Like you didn't know, Julie. You just asked and didn't come across really any issues from it. And technically, it's not part of this ruling that Lawrence has so graciously provided us all with. But you were able to have it happen for your loved one.
Right.
There was another question. What does MC/DD stand for?
You want me to go?
Yes.
It's a medically complex facility for the developmentally disabled. So these facilities used to be called under 22s, and they were primarily pediatric facilities for people with medically complex issues. Over the last, actually, I don't remember how many years ago, but it's been within the last 10 years, the state has changed how those facilities are licensed, and now it's medically complex facilities for developmentally disabled. So those same buildings now are licensed to handle people of any age. So there still are some that are just primarily for individuals that are children, but we also see adults and MCDDs as well. It's usually people with very high medical needs in those facilities.
Okay. It doesn't look like we have any other questions in the box for today. I think this was extremely useful information. It really does feel like As Julie has said a couple of times, this is things that people do not know about. And that is a lot of the purpose of this meeting, is for people to be able to share what it is that you're doing so that we could all advocate and do better for those that we love. And that this is not just necessarily, if we approach a conversation like this with the long-term care community that our loved ones in, saying, I want to watch you guys, making sure you're taking care of my father, you're not going to have the same results as you would, as Julie did, by saying, I just want to make sure that I can see my father and I can be there to be able to provide comfort and see him and be able to assist you guys and let you know when I'm watching him if he does have a need that he can't articulate. I think that that's a better way, a better approach than just saying, we want to keep an eye on you to make sure you're doing your job. So we've got a comment just saying it was so helpful, and thank you, Lawrence. Really, thank you for that. Does anybody have any other comments or anything? What we will be doing is we'll be staying on like we always do, and I'll be taking these and sending them off to everybody. And do know that we're getting better with getting the information onto the Illinois Department of Aging's website. We're able to streamline that process a little bit better. So hopefully if you go there, I believe I checked it yesterday and most of the meetings were up there with the links, as well as any other, if we referenced a brochure or anything else, that's all up there as well. We are still having difficulty with the video due to the bandwidth that it takes to be able to put that onto the website and get that ironed out. But we're continuing to record these. And when we get that figured out, we will be putting the recordings up onto the IDOA, the Illinois Department of Aging's website under the Ombudsman page. I want everyone to know that the next topic that we're going to be talking about is your long-term care discharge rights and financial rights as someone who lives in a long-term care facility. We have started getting some questions regarding the stimulus checks. So that's part of what prompted part of this conversation as well. We are always open to suggestions from all of you on what topics it is that you want to hear. That's how this topic came forward today. It was actually suggested, I believe through Karen, who had been hearing questions from people. So know that that is something that we do want. And I can type my email address in the chat box so that if anybody wants to email me directly with any ideas that they have, or if you would like even to be a volunteer for the board, or to be able to be a volunteer for the work group, a volunteer for this work group, we'd also really would welcome that as well. We do want this to become more of a family and resident-oriented group than being led by us, because we know that all of you, we want to be a part of it, but we don't want to take it over. We want to make sure that all of you feel that this is your meeting.
And they're more than welcome to get hold of me at the same time. I mean, most of them know where to find me. Also, Lee, we just put up a website. Can we link the stuff from the Office on Aging's website to ours?
Yes, I don't see why you couldn't. Is anybody on the call, Jess? Anybody else? I don't see why you wouldn't. It's a public website. I think it actually would be very welcomed.
Okay, that's fine. I'll get with Jill, who's doing our website, and tell her when she has time. But right now I can't ask much more of her.
And I just put my email address in the chat box. And Carrie, if you want to stick yours in there too, I think a lot of people already have yours. But if you want to stick it in there, that might be helpful as well for people.
Okay.
So I'll be staying on. If anybody would like to chat anything in there or want to keep on talking, I'm here now that I'm here. So thank you everybody for being a part of this today. I really learned a lot. So thank you very much, Julie and Lawrence. It was really
Thank you. And Lee, I don't mind staying on a little bit longer too, if someone wants to ask some questions.
Thank you, Julie. Truly
I guess I can stay on too.
Oh, why not? And if you want to, you can even just unmute yourself if you want to ask the question directly.